after the first in a new series of Case Study, in which Claudia Hammond revisits the cases which feature in psychology textbooks around the world. This week, she's on the trail of H.M., the man who couldn't remember, whose profound amnesia helped us understand the mechanics of memory.
His case is highlighted in most, if not all, introductory psychology books, in cognitive science textbooks, cognitive neuroscience textbooks, and even in advanced neuroscience books that are read by graduate students and medical students. So lots of people know him.
The man who for decades was known only by his initials HM is the most famous neurological patient in the world. HM lost his memory, yet told us more about how memory works than anyone else.
I don't remember things.
Do you know what you did yesterday?
No, I don't.
How about this morning?
I don't even remember that.
Can you tell me what you had for lunch today?
I don't know, to tell you the truth.
He has no continuity from day to day, from morning to afternoon, from hour to hour, or even from minute to minute if you distract him. He could talk to you for 15 minutes or so and tell you the same story 3 times with the same words and the same intonation and have no idea that he told it to you before.
The reason for HM's profound amnesia was a brain operation he underwent back in 1953. Ever since I was a student, I've been intrigued by the man behind the case study, so I travelled to New England to find out more.
Take a deep breath, lock your brakes. Yes. Go and turn around.
It was here at Bickford Nursing Home in Windsor Locks in Connecticut in the United States that he spent many years until his death in December 2008, because without the ability to form new memories, he was unable to care for himself. Eileen Muhar is the resident care coordinator here. Would he ever get upset because he was confused and couldn't remember, where he'd gone or what he was doing?
No, he never got upset about that. Everybody to him, even if you went in and you were a stranger, you were a friend. He was never frightened of anybody, and he was very polite to everybody.
And it must have been strange for you, because you get to know him better and better, but he never gets
to know you.
Born in 1926 in Manchester, Connecticut, Henry Meliason, his identity's only been released since his death, was an only child. When he was 9, he was knocked over by a cyclist and hit his forehead. Within a year, he was experiencing minor epileptic fits or absences. But then, on his 16th birthday, he had his first major seizure, and over the next 10 years the fits increased until he could no longer lead a normal life.
HM had this dreadful epilepsy. He was on maximum doses of the anticonvulsant medication of the day, but in spite of that he was having these major seizures and lots of minor ones all the time. It was preventing him working and so on. It was a terrible life.
Dr. Brenda Milner is an eminent neurologist. She was born in England in 1918 and she's still working in Montreal, Canada. In 1953, she was doing her PhD at McGill University, studying the epilepsy patients of the famous neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield. Penfield was having some success, improving their condition with an operation where he removed the hippocampus, a small area shaped like a seahorse towards the middle of the brain, in what's called the medial temporal lobes. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, HM was being treated at the Hartford Hospital by Dr. William Beecher Scoville.
He had consulted Scoville over the years, and Scoville suggested surgery could help because of the news that was coming out of Montreal of the fact that lots of temporal lobe epilepsies seemed to be helped by these removals that included the hippocampal region. He had the idea that maybe his surgery could help HM's epilepsy.
It was his choice to have the surgery.
And before that, he was having all these seizures, wasn't he, all the time?
And I think the quality of life for Henry with the seizures was not a good quality of life.
So on September 1st, 1953, William Scoville inserted a silver straw into his brain and sucked out some tissue. The surgery stopped the fits, but it soon became apparent that HM had lost the ability to make new memories. So Scoville invited Dr. Milner to visit. It was the start of a 30-year working relationship.
We had to go by train overnight in those days, and I would get to Hartford about 4 a.m, and Dr. Scoville would meet me, and I made quite a lot of trips in those days for a day or two down there and then back to Montreal, I remember very much that first time. I meet this very charming, very pleasant young man, and he was extremely polite always and really very pleased to work with us. The reason that HM seemed to understand so well why it was important that we work with him was because this operation of Scoville's had not been embarked on impulsively, but this was discussed with HM and with his parents before eventually the decision was made. And this meant that HM understood that he'd had this brain operation because his retrograde amnesia didn't stretch back far enough to stop him knowing that he'd had these discussions and knowing Dr. Scoville. Like he never got to know me, but he knew Dr. Scoville because he had consulted him for years before the surgery.
If you told him that Dr. Scoville said to get out of bed, if he didn't want to get out of bed, if you said Dr. Scoville said to, he'd say, okay, Dr. Scoville said. So he remembered because Dr. Scoville was before the surgery.
And that was the person who did the surgery, of course.
Correct. This is Mary Jane Edgars. She's a certified nursing assistant who took care of Henry.
He was a very nice guy, very funny, jokingly kind. Everything you would tell him, he said, Dr. Scoville would say, yeah. Dr. Scoville would say, he cannot do that, or who said, Henry, he's dead. There is nothing he can do. He said, no. He was, very adamant about what Dr. Scoville said.
And what was William Scoville's reaction when he discovered, what had happened to HM in the operation, and then in effect that he had lost the ability to make new memories?
He was terribly shocked, and he wrote articles everywhere to say that nobody should be doing this kind of operation because there was this risk to memory.
Sadly, it was too late for HM. But his misfortune did provide a unique opportunity to establish that there's more than one memory system in the brain, and this is what Brenda Milner set out to do.
If you can't build up your autobiography, I don't know if you saw the film Memento, but that state of mind, in which as soon as your attention is diverted, you lose what happened before. You have no continuity in your life. You can really say this person's lost their memory. It's obviously the most important aspect of memory. However, as a psychologist, it was never satisfactory just to say, you've lost your memory, you can't learn anything. The challenge was to see if such a patient could learn anything.
She set about running a battery of tests on him to work out whether he could learn anything new.
Lots of the tasks I took, he failed miserably, made no progress over 3 days. But in contrast, this little mirror drawing task in which you have a 5-pointed star drawn on a sheet of paper, 8 by 10 sheet of paper, with a double contour so that it's a double-edged star. And you can ask the subject to start at point S, at one of the spikes of the star, and draw a line with a pencil, keeping within the narrow borders of the star till you come round to the beginning again. Now, that sounds terribly easy, but what makes it difficult is that you only see your hand and the star as reflected in a mirror. That's why we call it mirror drawing.
Oh, so you keep doing it the wrong way. You sort of go the opposite way at
Well,
first.
yes, if you try doing that, a star is a fiendish thing to do, you see, because as soon as you get to the point, your hand goes back and forth, And then, of course, with practice, you learn. And what was very moving to me, I can still remember this, was after 3 days of this, I'd do 10 trials with him, and I'd then say goodnight. And, of course, the next day, he didn't know he'd ever seen me before, and so on. We'd start doing this again. And then on the third day, he had this beautiful performance. And then he said, this was after the last trial, right? He said, I thought this would be difficult, but I seem to have done this well, because he could see the drawing, and he had absolutely no recollection of all those previous trials he had done. Psychologists had often speculated that motor learning might be a little bit different. It's the sort of learning you learn to ski in the winter and you can still do it the following year. Above all, you learn by doing, by repeating, by practice. So this does intuitively perhaps seem like a different kind of learning, but this was evidence that indeed it was different. Of course, now we know there are all kinds of learning, but people always ask you, when you reach a certain age, people start asking you, well, what were the important, most exciting moments, in your scientific career? And I think that this moment, was certainly would rank very high.
Since then, we've done other motor skill learning tasks and shown that this was not an isolated event, that he does improve on a number of different motor skill tasks.
One of Brenda Milner's students, Suzanne Corkin, became the main person coordinating research on HM and continued to do so for the rest of his life. So I've come to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in Boston, where today Suzanne Corkin is Professor of Behavioural Neuroscience. And this is her department right here.
I went to work in Brenda's lab in July of 1961 to study somatosensory function, the sense of touch, in people who had discrete parts of their cerebral cortex removed for the relief of epilepsy. So a year later, in 1962, when HM and his mother came to the Montreal Neurological Institute, that's when I met HM for the first time. He and his mother came up by train. They spent a week. She hung out in the neurology waiting room, and that's where I would go and pick up HM, take him down the hall to my little testing room.
And did you already have an idea by that time that HM would become a very famous case within neuroscience?
I couldn't foresee HM's amazing contribution over 53 years.
Suzanne Corkin tested HM many times, and on one occasion she recorded him. She allowed me to hear this rare recording from 1977.
How long have you had trouble remembering things?
That I don't know myself. I can't tell you because I don't remember.
Well, do you think it's been more than a year that you've had this problem?
I think it's about that, about a year or more. Because I believe I had and this is just a thought that I'm having myself, that I possibly have had an operation or something.
Uh-huh. What do you do to try to remember?
That I don't know, because I don't remember when I tried.
Is it harder for you to remember things than it is for other people to remember things?
Yes, I think it is. But the funny thing, I go with crossword puzzles now a lot more than I used to.
Really? Why is that?
Because then maybe I remember words. And sometimes I don't have to look them up. I remember them.
He would keep a crossword puzzle book and pencil with him at all times. Anytime there was a lull in activities, he would do crossword puzzles. And he thought that this helped him because he was thinking of words. He was retrieving information from his long-term semantic memory. And he thought that was beneficial to him, and maybe it was.
I used to do them in the newspaper before I was sick and everything.
And when was that? How long ago was that?
Well, when I was 15,
Uh-huh.
I got really sick. That was the first time.
Uh-huh. You have to make a distinction between events that happen preoperatively and events that happen postoperatively. In terms of preoperative remote memory, his knowledge of public events is excellent, and we've actually tested this formally with pictures of famous people, and he's just as good as age-matched control people for the years before his operation for public events. For autobiographical information, he has no episodic memory at all. Can you remember a special event with your father or a trip or something like that?
Well, there I'm stuck in a way because I remember a trip going over the Mohawk Trail because we've been over it so many times.
Right.
That was my mother and my father and myself.
Uh-huh.
We go over it.
He can't relate to you an incident that happened at a specific time and place before his operation. What he does have is the gist of his life up until his operation. He had several hobbies: collecting guns, target practice, roller skating, and he loves to talk about these things, but he can never tell you a unique event.
And does that make sense in terms of what you know about his brain injury?
The conclusion that you can draw from this is that you need these crucial medial temporal lobe structures to have autobiographical memories. The hippocampus in humans is about 4 to 4.5 centimeters. And we now know from MRI scans that about the anterior 2 centimeters was removed on the left side and on the right side. What this means is that there is some preserved hippocampal tissue. However, this tissue is non-functional because the structure through which information travels on his way to the hippocampus was removed.
Oh, so the bit that he's left with was useless in a way because the rest couldn't get to it.
When you look at it on an MRI scan, you can see that it's quite shriveled. In addition to the hippocampus, the amygdala was also removed. And this is an area that touches the hippocampus. This is the seat of emotion. So that was a significant part of the behavioral picture.
He wouldn't cry. He would get angry. He had anger sometimes, but I never saw sadness. He would get happy. He would smile. He had that emotion and anger, but sadness and stuff like that, no, I never saw that.
In addition, there was cortex around the hippocampus and the amygdala that was removed. So from HM study alone, you can't say that his amnesia is due to the hippocampal removal or the removal of surrounding cortex. No doubt they all contributed to the deficit. There are also studies from other labs, for example, Larry Squire's group, where they have studied patients with lesions restricted to the hippocampus. And these patients typically have a less severe memory impairment than HM. HM is the yardstick against which other amnesic patients are evaluated. His amnesia was pure. What I mean by that is that his intelligence was preserved. He was a smart man. He retained his early learning. His vocabulary was very good. His IQ was average to above average, and that made him special because any memory impairment couldn't be attributed to intellectual loss. Another thing that was special about him was that he did not have any psychiatric symptoms. He was not depressed. He was psychiatrically normal.
So every time you met him, did you having to start a brand new relationship with him in a sense? I mean, you had this strange situation where you'd get to know him better and better, presumably, but he never got to know you better.
Well, so there was a half of a relationship. I knew him well, and I had known him for a long time. Interestingly, he thought he knew me. Have we ever met before, you and I?
Yes, I think we have.
Where?
In high school.
In high school?
Yes.
And what year was that about?
1945.
Have we ever met any other place?
46.
And this was absolutely consistent, time after time after time. There was something about me, some feeling of familiarity that he got when he saw me, and so he never looked at me as a stranger. Have we ever met any place besides high school?
No, I don't think so.
Some of the staff he thought he went to high school with. There was quite a few staff that he thought he went to high school with. There's some pictures here. We have senior prom every year, and they all dress up, in formal outfits. And I know Henry was king one year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he should be up there.
He's over here.
Is he over here?
2000.
Oh, there's
Right
Henry.
there. Yeah.
And you can see him with his crown on and a
With his
sash across
crown
him.
And the queen's with him.
So he's prom king.
He was the prom king.
What did he make of that?
He liked it. He liked the attention.
When I went to Bickford Nursing Home, I was really struck by the amount that was going on there. Henry Meliason came there in 1989, following the death of the distant relative who'd been looking after him since his mother died. With his family gone, Henry needed a guardian to ensure his interests were protected.
The court in Connecticut appointed a conservator, which is what they call it in Connecticut, and that was the son of the woman who'd been taking care of him.
And did you have to keep getting consent from him again and again to continue with the studies?
Oh, absolutely.
You had to keep explaining
every time. After the court appointer conservator was in place, he would sign the consent form, and HM would also sign the consent form. He was a wonderful research subject. He loved doing the tests, and he loved interacting with the people in my lab.
In 1964, Suzanne Corkin had moved to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. 2 years later, HM came to MIT for the first of many visits.
I think it was maybe one of the bright spots of his life that he could come and stay at the Clinical Research Center and have people doting on him and, almost entertaining him with the tests.
Did he have some idea of how significant his case was and how useful that could be to brain science.
The only time he knew how important he was to science was when I would tell him that he was very famous because of all the tests that he did and all of the things that he taught us. But of course he would forget that immediately. 20 seconds later, he wouldn't retain that information. But he was altruistic. He had a very positive attitude. How do you feel about having a problem remembering things?
Well, I don't feel good about it, but I think of what is found out about me will help the medical people scan other people too and help them.
Have you had all sorts of people getting in touch with you over the years wanting to research HM?
Nearly 100 scientists have had an opportunity to interview or test HM. I'm talking about people who worked in Brenda's lab, people who worked in my lab, and scientists from other universities. So after significant vetting, many people actually did come and do experiments here with HM. The reason that we kept studying HM was because we kept asking new research questions. As cognitive theories became more sophisticated, we had new questions to address. In addition, as brain imaging methods became better, we could get a better and better look at his brain. So we were always motivated to learn more about him and also to see how he changed as he got old, because he had the operation when he was 27 and he died when he was 82.
So he died in December 2008.
Yes.
Was that very sudden, or had he been getting iller?
He was getting older, and he had a lot of medical conditions too, so we had special instructions from MIT when he dies. This, and this are done, and yes, it was all done.
When he died, Suzanne called me on my cell phone. I had all the flight schedules to know what flight I would have to take when I would have this fateful call from Suzanne, which came in the afternoon of the 2nd of December in 2008.
Jacopo Inese is director of the Brain Observatory at the University of California, San Diego. He specialises in dissecting and analysing brains, but HM's case was unique. The man who'd been studied more than any other single individual when he was alive was now going to reveal even more in death. This was going to be a very special project, and the preparations were painstaking.
We did the autopsy early in the morning the next day.
So I was in an adjacent room, which they call the clean room, standing on a chair looking through a window down on this whole procedure. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most exciting times of my entire life to see that we would now be able to interpret all of these years and years and years of behavioral data in terms of what really happened to HM's brain. I've got to say, just talking about it, I'm tingling. It was really exciting. Of course, later on in somber moments, for example, when I was writing his obituary, I realized that I had lost a friend, and that was tough.
The brain actually stayed undisturbed at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston for quite a few weeks. It was not safe to transport it back to San Diego before it would be chemically fixed and hardened enough. And we built a special chamber to carry it. It was sort of suspended in this very soft and fluffy bed of cotton in all the solutions that it needed. And it was quite a challenge, actually, to convince the Transportation Security Administration to let us carry a lot of fluids on the plane.
Absolutely. You're only allowed 100 millilitres, aren't you? So
yeah, and no brains, I would imagine.
I imagine not. So were you there queuing up at security to go through the X-ray with his brain in a container?
I wrote a letter describing how important this project is for neuroscience, and they were sensitive to that. They did their own check on the container while I was screened by normal security.
What did you do with his brain on the flight?
We were given 3 seats, a whole row, and I don't mean to be coy, but HM was sitting on the window seat and I was sitting on the aisle seat.
So you've been slicing up the brain and putting all the pictures online so that anyone can see them.
The freezing and the slicing of the brain went very, very well. We had more than 400,000 people watching our section in the brain of HM online. it became quite a web phenomenon. So essentially now we have 2,401 sections of tissue that we can study.
So they're very thin, these slices, then?
They're very thin, yes. They are 70 micrometers, and a micrometer is 1,000th of a millimeter. So it's like a very, very thin paper. The beautiful thing is that each one of these slices, it's really like a world in itself. We had created over the past 2 years this technology in which you can essentially image the surface of this single slice as if it were the surface of the Earth, as if the microscope becomes almost like a satellite imaging. So you can zoom in to look at every single cell.
Why did you want to slice it in this way rather than dissect it in a more traditional way?
We know that the hippocampus is connected to many areas in the brain. So it would have been very easy to miss a lot of important evidence if we had done what was done to Einstein's brain, to give you an idea, which was cut into maybe 100 or 150 blocks, some very small blocks of tissue, and some have been analyzed, some have not. We wanted to make sure that we were able to survey very different and remote places of the brain, maintaining a sort of three-dimensional model. Now, on the more philosophical aspect, again, having met HM, and I work with other donors whom I meet regularly, it's the idea that this is a person, and it's sort of the identity, the intelligence, everything about the person relies on the brain to be. And just to maintain the identity of this person, in order to immortalize the figure of HM, I think it was important to treat the brain as a whole and not disintegrate it into too many pieces.
The slices of Henry Molaison's brain can now be seen online, and Professor Anese hopes that the international research community will take part in the project, offering their interpretations of HM's brain in the same way that they researched his behaviour while he was still alive. Even in death, HM continues to be an invaluable case study. Suzanne Corkin.
This is a neuroscientist dream come true, because what we're doing has never been done before. We have mounds of behavioral data. We have these very high-resolution scans. Scientists all over the world will be able to look at HM's brain and ask their own questions. So I think that he is going to continue to give us information for decades.
Henry made that decision, not knowing what the outcome of the surgery would be. And I think after the surgery, he was content in his life and he was happy. We miss him.
Are you happy?
Yes. Well, the way I figure it is what they find out about me helps them to help other people.
Are you ever sad?
No, I figure what is learned about me, they can also do on someone else or not do on someone else.
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks very much.